I always default back to content is king. And so as long as the conversation is high quality and my guests are going to be getting something out of it, that's what's the most important for this kind of show is like communicating. And as long as we can hear each other, that's key.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
And we're back with another episode of the podcast on podcasting. It's your host, Adam A. Adams. And today I have Susie Singer Carter. And she actually is a singer and an actor and comes from a family who has been doing that. She's a native Angeleno, and she's got a podcast that she's been running for a long time, for a year and a half, and she's starting a new podcast, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Susie, the first question that I want to ask you is why you started your first podcast, Love Conquers Alz, back in December, I think you said December 9th of 2019. What made you decide to start that podcast? What did you learn along the way? That's where I want to start this interview.
Oh gosh, it's a big question. All right, so I started Love Conquers Alz because I did a film in 2017 it was a short film, we were Oscar qualified, called My Mom and the Girl, and it was with Valerie Harper, her last performance, which is brilliant. And it's based on my mother who has Alzheimer's. And that journey with my mom taught me how to lean in and how to find the silver linings and the gifts that you can get when life changes. And instead of lamenting what you lost, to embrace what is new and what you can enjoy now. So that was that. And I realized that it's a conversation that was desperately needed because when we traveled with the film everywhere on the festival circuits, I think I hugged more strangers in 1 year and cried with more strangers in 1 year than I had in my entire life. So I knew that it was something that was desperately needed. And I wanted just to keep the conversation going. And that's why I started it. And if it helps anybody, I'm super happy. And part B, I think you said, what were the challenges?
Yeah.
Well, the challenge, I got everything because I just jumped right into it, right? So I thought, well, I can produce. I'm a filmmaker. I know how to do this stuff. And I jumped right on in. I didn't realize how much work it can be, especially if I do have a co-host, but I'm pretty much taking on all the nuts and bolts of it. So it is a lot of work. So I think that you got to love it. And I made a commitment to it to be consistent. So I do a bi-monthly show and I do a teaser. So every week I'm sending up something. So it's a never ending production. It's never ending. You're booking guests, you're recording. And then I was talked into doing it video as well. And that's a whole nother ball. And then as a filmmaker, I mean, listen, you don't have to edit the hell out of it like I do, but I do. Because I want it to look great and I want it to sound great and I want it to not bore anybody. I want everyone to look good and feel good about the interview. So that's a whole nother thing. So I would say on the technical end, I went through so much trial and error. It was from microphones to platforms. I mean, I realized Zoom was not cutting it for me. It was so awful. For podcast, for conference, perfect. I love you, Zoom. We're using Zoom now, but I'll tell you why. If you're doing more than one guest, there's other platforms where you can have separate audio feeds, and that's more conducive for your editing. So for me, I needed to find something, and that worked for me. And Riverside FM came up at the time when I was like desperately looking for a platform that was a little bit more stable audio wise, and that did the trick. So yeah.
I want to jump into that for a minute or two with you, Susie, if you don't mind me interrupting you there.
Yeah, no, please do, because I'll just keep going.
So with Zoom, I still use Zoom, even though awesome companies like Riverside.fm are around. So zoom.us, that'll be in the show notes. You'll see it in the resources section. Riverside.fm, that'll be in the show notes since we talked about those. So if you're listening and you just want to check those out, you can literally just click on those links. It'll take you there. Just to share, I'm doing usually about 6, 7, or 8 episodes on a Wednesday, or at least 8 during the week. And so what ended up happening when I was using Riverside, there was one of two ways to do it. One of the ways is that you let somebody schedule, or you schedule with them manually. And after that, then you have to go in and just create a new link so that it's a unique link for that one thing. And so that was one option where it took that extra time to just make sure that each and every episode, and I was doing 8 a week, would jump in and be able to have a unique link. If we didn't do that, the other option that I had was we schedule when somebody goes onto my calendar. I use Calendly. They would always use my personal link. And the issue with using the personal link with 8 episodes a week is there's inevitably people testing it out at random times. They're like, oh, let me just make sure this link works. And so they click the link. And so here I am already in a podcast, and I'm getting interrupted with other people that I'm going to podcast with later in the day. And it would just drive me crazy. So with Zoom and Calendly, and Calendly, we'll put that into the show notes as well. With Calendly, it integrates automatically with my Zoom so that it will propagate a brand new, like, unique Zoom link each and every time somebody schedules. And that's been helpful for me. So I've actually let go of some of the audio quality, some of the ability to edit the 2 different pieces of sound at a time. And in order to make it just easier on me to do that many. So I'm curious with you and switching from Zoom to Riverside. I'm all about you switching, and I'm glad that you did. I'm curious how you end up giving people the link. Are you using a personal link? Did Calendly recently open up the Riverside the way and integrate it? Or are you giving a personal link?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by a personal link, but for each of my guests, I make a link on Riverside, okay? And then I include that in the invitation. Now, there's a way you can solve that, is that you can have up to 8 guests on a single podcast for Riverside FM right now. So you can have, like, and I know you had that issue of people checking in to see beforehand and while you might be on another interview. I think you can solve that. You can do up to 8 guests. So you can use one link for 8 guests. And then I haven't had that issue of people checking in, but I know they do that on Zoom a lot. But if they do, they can't, if you don't choose a green room, they're not going to be able to get in. There's nothing they can do. So it's not going to interrupt your flow if you're in the middle of an interview. So I think you can work around that. I think if you want to, I'm just saying, and that would be the hack for me, is to do it that way. And when I talk about the narrative that I'm doing with like 20 different cast members an episode sometimes, and I can only go up to 8 people. So I have to have sometimes 3 different links. So it might be I Love Lucifer episode 1, part A, part B, part C. So I can keep it all scheduled and I know who's been recorded where. But yeah, I think you can get around that way if it matters to you. Personally, for me, I think Zoom is great for interview. And I think, yes, quality, I'm all about quality. Trust me, I'm like A-type about that. But I'm also about content, and content is king. I think, yeah.
With your new podcast, you're starting a new podcast. It's airing pretty soon from now, and by the time that this episode is published, it's probably up and going. And tell us just a brief about that new podcast, what it's called, how they'll be able to find it, in case they do want to jump over. Just mention that right now, and we will make sure also that we'll find the link. My team, as we're doing post-production, we'll have that link in the show notes as well.
Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you, Adam. So I have a podcast coming out called I Love Lucifer. It's a comedy horror based on a project that I had developed with Max Brooks, who wrote World War Z, The Zombie Survival Guide. He's kind of a genius. He comes from Hollywood royalty. Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft are his parents. And he helped us set this world in a very authentic way for fans. So if you're fans of horror and comedy, you will love this. It's 2 B movie stars who fight movie monsters by day and real monsters by night, who hate each other. Okay, so they're just rivals, and it's really a fun ride. The production is fantastic. We're having a blast. We have Adam Levy from The Witcher, who's playing one of our leads, and he's our narrator, and he's delicious. And the sound design will blow your mind, and it's as scary as American Werewolf in London and as fun as Bridesmaids.
That sounds like a lot of time, effort, energy, cost, labor, all that kind of stuff, post-production. So out of curiosity, I have 2 questions. One of them, I really want to talk about just what are you just doing differently about like the marketing and the growth of the show after having the other one? And B, I'd like to just understand what really goes into a film like that and how you monetize, how you make sure that it's not just you spending $300,000 to get a podcast up and running. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Sure, absolutely. I want to backtrack 1 second just to say, because we're going to talk about marketing. So with Love Conquers Alz, which was like me just diving in head first without looking, like a cheerleader. And then we actually won a Best Podcast of 2020 with New Media Film Festival. It's very early for me right now. I'm a night owl, so this is early. But yeah, New Media Film Festival. And so I'm saying that because we had some bragging rights. I have really wonderful guests like Leeza Gibbon, who has been like everyone knows Leeza. She's phenomenal. That was the episode we won for Best Podcast with. So I'm saying all that because I have no idea how to market a podcast other than social media. And if you're doing it yourself, to handle all that is just daunting. It's daunting. So with this I Love Lucifer, which I think because it really is a proof of concept in a way too for a franchise, really. It's totally poised to be a graphic novel, a TV series, feature films. It's really that fun and that big. So I really want to give it the best chance it could have. So in terms of marketing, I've been living in research of marketing podcasts in particular and finding who and where I can go to get that help for the cheapest amount because our budget is like that. And we are working a very small crew on this because there's too much to talk about, Adam. I mean, if you bring on a production company, we happen to be auteurs, so my partner and I can do everything. We edit, we write, we direct, we both are voice actors, we can do it all. But we're probably doing, like you said, $300,000 worth of work for free. But we own our IP now. If you bring on a production company, they are going to either own all of it or you will lose a lot of it. And sometimes that's fine. Sometimes that is perfect and you need a partner or you don't mind splitting it. This one, we decided we're going to do it all on our own. And so we ended up just doing a lot of sweat equity right now. And the actors, everyone loved the project, including like all of our high profile actors that are on it are like, we're in, we love it. We're in. And it's not a little commitment. We're talking about, it's a big commitment, even though we're doing, because of COVID, we are recording virtually, which has been such a challenge, especially for horror, because we have to scream a lot. And distortion is my enemy. It's our biggest enemy. I don't care what, I mean, if you're not in a real recording studio, it doesn't matter. The best mics out there will not handle a scream. Am I right, Adam?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. We don't scream on our podcasts so far.
It's horrible. It's horrible. It's horrible. We were like watching a show, my partner and I were watching a show, Breeders, actually, and one of the main characters, she's an audio engineer for film, and she was actually doing some audio, like ADR for a horror, and they were screaming in the studio. And we were like, we're so jealous. We're so jealous because all the equipment that they had and the booths that they were able to be in. Anyway, I mean, my actors are in closets right now.
So out of curiosity, I know I'm interrupting you again. With your team that you're working with on this project, many of them well-known actors, and you have a decent-sized team, whereas it's so decent that you're capped at 8 people at a time, and so you might even have 3 different versions where you can have 8, 8, and 8. So it sounds big. It sounds like a lot. And my question is, are you buying specific microphones so that everybody has kind of like, it sounds like they're in the same room and all that kind of stuff? Or do they just use their own mics, or how does that work?
Good question. Right now, we're trying to be as consistent as possible. My partner, Don Priest, is like, being an editor for 25 years is like, it is his biggest thorn in his side. It's bad sound. Like, and I'll go, oh, it sounds great. And he'll go, are you kidding me? His ear is so fine-tuned for sound. But we started sending people who we're trying to keep the budget down. So we hope that some people, because of COVID, had already invested in pretty good microphones, especially actors, because they have to put their auditions on tape, right? So that's good. But some of them did not. So if they didn't, we invested in them and we sent them. We started with the cheaper one, good, but less price points. And we started with snowballs, and we're sending people snowball and earphones. And sometimes that worked depending on the size of the role. But for the leads, we ended up moving over to Rode, and not the top one, like the one we have in our studio where my partner works as an editor. He has an XLR mic, and it's much better. These are still USB mic Rodes. It's like, here it is right here that we use, and it's much better. It's much better than for acting, for emoting. It's a better microphone than the snowball. But in a pinch, it worked okay for the smaller roles. For the ones that weren't blowing out the sound too much, it was okay. It's still a challenge, yeah. And Riverside is still a challenge for that. There's nothing that's completely 100% great right now.
Got it.
But we do it, yeah.
So let's go back to just the podcast that you had first. It went for about a year and a half so far, and you're launching this new podcast because you've been a director, you've been in film for a long time, you've published other shows as well. I've got a list of them in front of me, and I know you've done several. So the thought that I'm having is really, or the question that I'm having with this new podcast, besides the fact that it's like a totally different style than the first one, what are you being intentional about doing differently than that when you launched your first one?
Intentionally, I'm making sure that this launch, all right, so we are launching through a platform called Authentic Podcast Network, which is under the umbrella of Authentic Literary and Talent Agent Management. And that is, Adam Levy is their client. They fell in love with it, what he was sharing the first couple podcasts we did. And they said, we want to have this on our network. And that was a whole nother world for us because they are partnered with Adlarge. And they're also partners with Megaphone, which is a platform for podcasts, which I wasn't familiar with. They're the same thing. Once you're with them, once you upload your RSS feed, then it goes to all of the podcast platforms, like any other platform, like Buzzsprout or Anchor, so on and so forth. So we'll be launching with them, but we'll be everywhere, Apple and everything. And so we just thought, well, as long as we've got this wonderful support system that way, let's put a little bit of our money behind the belief in this project. So the money that we've invested besides our equipment is going to go into marketing because we really want people to find this. And I still don't know because we're just starting marketing this week. And I'm working with a couple different companies, people that are experts in one area and experts in another area, because podcasting is just it's a very niche kind of platform that really services a unique community, right? People that listen to podcasts are not the same people that binge on Netflix, really. They might cross over, but they're definitely a specific audience, which I'm learning. So I'm saying this to your audience, like, I'm neophyte as the rest of you in terms of the marketing. I find it daunting, but I think it's important if you're investing a lot of time and money into something, or even if it's your own sweat equity, you have to figure out the marketing. The marketing is key because no one's going to find you if they don't know who you are. And I do believe that the marketplace is glutted at this point. Listen, there's still opportunity to launch anything, but you have to figure out how to get, it used to be eyeballs to your project, but how do you get the eardrums to your project and bang those drums above the noise of everything else? So that's the key. Marketing is the key in anything, right? I mean, I've worked on every studio film that I've ever worked on is like the budget for marketing is double usually the budget of your project. Because people people have to find you. They have to.
100%.
And I think, just having a viral effect can happen, but I wouldn't depend on that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't anymore.
What are 3 things, going back to your first podcast about Love Conquers Alz, and out of, I think it's 18 months or so of publishing that podcast, hopefully making errors and doing things right, what are 3 things that may have surprised you in like what it takes to launch a podcast, do a podcast, find guests, or just maybe with tools and automation? What are 3 tangibles that you learned from that first podcast that you can give and pour into a new podcaster?
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me try to say something that I didn't say. I mean, you said guests, that's sticking in my mind. Guests, I don't know if I've been fortunate or if it's what I'm doing, but I have not had any problem getting guests on my show. And to the point where, I mean, I can't keep up and book them because a lot of people want to have things that are urgent they want to talk about now. And I don't turn these around in a day. I turn mine around in about a month. So sometimes more. It depends. Like, I think what I was doing, let me take that back. When I first started, I did all my interviews, say I did like 8 interviews in a weekend. And then I had these like hour-long interviews that I had to edit. So this was going to take me it wasn't going to take me a week. I needed like 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
Because I was publishing every other week. And then I was publishing a teaser every other week for the upcoming one. And I put myself on a strict production schedule. I think I was late on maybe 2 of my episodes, and that's it. And that was because of circumstances I couldn't control. But I really adhered to my production schedule. And I think that was a mistake, doing that many in the beginning, because your guests that come as number 8, they feel like they're getting short shrift. And I don't want them to feel that. So I think it's better to do less interviews and get those out and then set your next interviews so that you're not putting on that pressure to get those out. Because I felt so much pressure in the beginning. I literally felt so much pressure. And, I forgot to tell you this. So I was doing this because I'm a writer. My first laptop that I was working on a year and a half ago was my Apple Air. And which could not handle the editing at all. And just to export a show was taking me I was so frustrated. I wanted to just throw my computer down. And so I had to invest in a MacBook Pro just for the editing ease and the speed of being able to render and to export your shows, upload your shows. So that was a challenge. Why I thought that my Air Mac was going to be handle this kind of a big job. No, it's for writers. That's about it. And doing social media. It's one step above an iPad, really.
That makes sense. So with your Apple, even the MacBook Pro, do you plug it into the internet or do you use Wi-Fi? Do you use Ether cord or do you just use over Wi-Fi?
I do Wi-Fi, but I do have, it's going to get technical. I have my boost. So is there something I'm missing? Should I be plugging into Ether?
So I serve podcasters as my company. And one thing that I always mention to them is to go ahead and hook into Ether. And the first way that they'll generally respond to that is it's too new. Like my MacBook Pro is too 2022 model. And so it doesn't have that anymore. There's no place to plug the Ether. And so a lot of people don't know that there are USB adapters. So you'll literally just plug in a USB. It's maybe just 4 inches or 5 inches or something. and then you'll plug in the ether into that adapter. And all it does is allows you to have a stronger internet connection for like podcast interviews.
Right.
So
stable.
If you're live streaming onto different platforms, which many people use something called StreamYard. StreamYard, we'll put that into the show notes as well. Many people like use StreamYard, and they'll be in 8 different places at a time. For example, they might be publishing live on LinkedIn, live on YouTube, live on Facebook, and a couple of other places as well. With being hooked into Wi-Fi, there could be a little bit of issues, but when you hook into the ether cord directly into the modem or the router, I don't actually know if it's called a modem or a router or if they're interchangeable words, but the point is if you got to plug directly into there, and it generally gives you a really, really, really strong, stable internet connection for interviews and live streaming. But we can...
That sounds like a smart idea. I have had a lot of guests, which we can't control, but they're with unstable Wi-Fi, and that can be an issue. But again, I always default back to content is king. And so as long as the conversation is, and I'm talking about for Love Conquers Alz, as long as the conversation is high quality and my guests are going to be getting something out of it, like your show, you're giving so much in your show. So that's what's the most important for this kind of show is like communicating. And as long as we can hear each other, that's key to me.
The next question that I was curious about is for podcasters that have about the experience that you have right now in podcasting. It's a challenge for me because you've been voice acting, you've been acting, you've been directing, like your whole life you've been in this business. Your family came from that. You grew up in LA and all this. So maybe it's difficult for you in particular. What I've noticed with me is I have a lot of filler words. In the beginning of many sentences, I'll say, okay, so, and then I'll go into something. Mm-hmm. Or I'll just say, okay, and then I go into the thing, or so, blah, 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 blah. But those words are generally unnecessary, and I don't even think about it, or I used to not think about it at all when I would start talking. Uh-huh. And then when I was editing my own Susie, like, it was driving me crazy. I'm like, why do I keep saying, okay, so every minute? Like I'll say, okay, so. And things like and and like, I might overuse a lot of those. And it drove me crazy as I was editing my own. I'm just curious your experience with podcasting, especially since you've done a lot of your own producing and post-production.
All of it.
Just what are you cutting out? What are you leaving? Did you never knew that you said? I'm really curious.
Oh, that's funny.
What you have there.
Yeah. Ums. But then, of course, look at Barack Obama. I mean, he had to really work on the ums, right? No, you find out so many things. I probably blocked them all out of my head, but but you do. Those are just techniques for us as human beings to think about what are we going to say. And I know for me, my mind goes faster than my mouth can keep up. So I do use those techniques as stalls. I don't think they're bad. I think if they're too much, then I cut them out. I also cut out, I like to ramble sometimes. I like to get off on stories. And sometimes I think, oh, maybe I've said that story too much. I'll tell funny stories with my mom. And I think, did I tell that story too much or has it been too close to the last one? I'll cut those out or we'll get on just a silly tangent because we always start our show kind of BSing back and forth. And sometimes I think it might be fun and sometimes it might be boring. So I cut that out. Or I have forgotten and chewed gum because ours is video. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like a cow. That's horrible. That's so horrible. So I just cut away to everyone else but me. I think probably because I'm an actress, I've avoided using things. Yeah. I'll try to avoid that as much as possible, but it's part of talking. It's part of communicating. I don't think we can completely obliterate that. We're not scripting. If we were scripting, that's a different thing, but we're not. And it's okay. And it's part of your charm, Adam. I wouldn't beat yourself up for ums and so okay. Those are just ramps up to, they're ramping your audience. It's like, so I'm about to ask a question. Yeah. And that's okay. That's all right. It's your charm.
Love
yeah,
it. I
don't think you guys should beat yourself up on that stuff. I think, again, content. What are you giving your audience? What can they take away and feel good about?
I like that. That's strong. I really appreciate you saying that. With post-production, you've been doing it on your own. And for me, I think with you, you've had quite a bit of experience in that realm. And so it's natural, it's comfortable. For your previous podcast, I think you enjoy it. You want to produce something really good that you feel great about. And with the new one, there's a lot to it. And it might be difficult even putting it off to a production company, but you also are owning all the IP. You said intellectual property before. You're owning all of that. So it makes sense that you would control it. I generally try to preach and teach that it's not something that we need to be doing as podcasters. In general, this obviously doesn't apply to you,
Agreed.
Susie. For most of us out there, because we don't have the experience that you have, or we don't have the level of production necessary that you have, it can be really helpful for us to offload that off to maybe a $10 or $15 an hour person and allow ourselves to focus on $200 an hour tasks and $300 an hour tasks, revenue generating activities, and being the star of your show, the content, but letting somebody handle kind of like those other things, especially if you have another job. I wondered, though, if somebody is listening and they do want to do their own post-production, just kind of what companies you use, what software you use to edit it, what you think about as you do the post-production. And maybe that can help somebody new to think of either like, oh, I don't want to do that shit myself, or they can say something to the effect of, oh, okay, that's what it takes. I want to do it on my own, so that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Listen, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So when your budget is limited and if you can't pay someone to do it, and I don't know all these resources that you're talking about, but I know that they're out there. I know that you can get people to do all that stuff. Marketing for, you can go on to Fiverr and there's people that are there that are trying to build up their resume. So there's people out there. You can do some reconnaissance and find people that can really do a good job. But there are a lot of things you can do yourself that aren't that hard to learn. So I work on Adobe Premiere and I work on that for editing because I'm doing video as well. And I learned that from my partner because he is an editor by trade. So I had to learn that. I wouldn't say that everybody can do it. It's not that easy, but it's not that hard. So if you really wanted to just learn the basics of editing, you can do it. I don't work on iMovie, but I hear people do work on it. I think it's clunkier than working on something on a professional level like Premiere Pro. I think if you could learn that, it's not that hard. I promise you, if I can do it, you can do it. And you can edit everything in one space. So their audio, you can edit audio there. If you want to get fancy, it ties into what's called Audition. So they have their own audio software that ties into Premiere. I don't use Audition. I used it for the first time because we had a musical version of an episode. So we had some songs. So I did edit some of the songs because I could separate the tracks a little bit easier in Audition and manipulate them. But I still brought them into Premiere. So you can do it and it's not that hard. And then you can, I would say, if you're going to do that, for me, the biggest thing I learned was organization, like organizing your files, making sure you keep it, and backup drives, like external drives for your storage, because I was killing my computers. Like I couldn't keep up with the storage. So now I have external storage, and that's key. You got to have that, right, Adam? I mean, you have to have that.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm all about that.
Yeah.
Speaking of I just said it again. Let's move directions.
And that's your charming thing. See, remember, is charming. Is charming.
I want, if you are listening, we've got a podcast called Love Conquers ALZ. That's ALZ for Alzheimer's. And Susie Singer Carter is the host of that show. And it has strong why behind the why. How come she's actually publishing this podcast? So I'm just asking you a favor, if you're listening, just to go and check out that podcast, Love Conquers Alz, and see if you can leave an honest rating and a review. Doesn't have to be 5-star, just an honest rating and review. Whatever you think of the show, let her know. I know she's trying to accomplish something important through that podcast. And they've got another podcast coming out. I think it's called I Love Lucifer. Little play on I Love Lucy, but Lucifer. And so you'll be able to find that. It should be out by the time this episode is airing, because they're literally publishing as we're speaking. So you should be able to find that right away. Both links are already in the show notes. And just to wrap it up, number one, Susie Singer Carter, I appreciate you being part of this podcast, being honest and transparent and vulnerable about what you've done, what you've learned, what you know, what you don't know, your experience. I love just that it's an overarching, overarching, I don't know which term I should be using there, but it's, what I want to say is that even though we never directly spoke about this on our podcast today, being yourself, being okay with being authentic, with making mistakes and learning as you go is something that I think that the listener could pull out of this episode as well. And if you are looking, for example, marketing your podcast is a key. It's a key to your success. So if you find the marketing being a daunting task, if you want people to find you and know who you are, my team helps with that. My team does post-production, and we also do the marketing to help get you in front of the right amount of people. So if you're interested, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, maybe I ought to market my podcast, go to growyourshow.com. This is my company. You can schedule a call to just chat with me. We can share with you what we can do for your post-production. We can share with you what we can do for marketing and getting you a larger audience. And Susie Singer Carter mentioned one thing, that you can go to Fiverr to do some things. And I would just be cautious about going to Fiverr. A lot of that is just auto bots, the robots. And so they may be just getting you fake listeners or fake reviews or something like that. If you're listening and you're thought about Fiverr, I just want you to be cautious to understand that if you go with the wrong team for marketing, it may actually work against you in your podcast. So we'd be happy to be there for you if you just want to schedule a call with me. It's, again, growyourshow.com. Susie?
I'm going to do it because...
Oh, perfect.
And by the way, I only said Fiverr because these are things that were sent, spewed out to me. I'm not going to Fiverr. I'm actually working with people that know this. And I think go to people that know. Go to people that have experience and have a track record and know. And yes, be yourself, because that's all you are. And if you're passionate about what you're doing, it will show. And that's why you'll get good guests and people will know that you love what you're doing. Like Adam, we didn't even know each other. And I could tell that you were this very cool, passionate person, professional. And I thought, I don't know what we're going to talk about, but let's do it.
Yeah,
let's do it. Yeah.
I don't know about professional. I'm wearing a t-shirt. I'm wearing a baseball cap. I have a beard.
Yes, you do. No, but that doesn't dictate your professionality. Professional is that you have all your infrastructure set up very nicely. You have a rules, how you produce your show. I felt confident. And I've done a lot of interviews, being interviewed. And I don't always feel confident with that show. Sometimes I think, where...
I know I'm interrupting you again, but I loved how when we started the call, I was driving and you're like, multitasker, huh? No. We're not going to record like this. We'll just do the pre-interview while I'm heading over to the office. I do have to confess that now is my cutoff time, only because I've got another interview that I'm starting right away. Susie Singer Carter, you added a ton of value. I appreciate you. I'm glad that we connected and we had a good conversation that I think also supported other people's podcasts.
I hope so.
So I'm going to jump off and I look forward to chatting a little bit more. If you're listening and you want to go to growyourshow.com, it's easy. You'll also find that in the show notes. Cool. And we're out. This episode's brought to you by growyourshow.com. Grow Your Show lets you be the star of your show while we handle all the hard stuff. We offer reliable and affordable post-production services that allow you to grow your show organically without all the work. So go ahead and check out the website right now, and feel free to schedule a call with me, and let's take your show to the next level. Again, growyourshow.com. You just press record. We handle the rest.